All right, so we have a few attendees logged in. I think we can begin the webinar now. Can I please request my colleague, Ms. Bhupinder Kaur, Senior Manager Brand Innovation at Lex Fitness, to make the introductions? Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're all safe and enjoying the festivities in the new normal way. A warm welcome to everyone in today's webinar, Demystifying Grievance Management, Governing Laws and Processes. Today's webinar is presented to you by Lex Witness, which is India's first magazine on legal and corporate affairs. We have now also ventured into an all-new world of Lex Witness Virtual, which is lexwitnesslive.com. This captures all our digital initiatives so far across an array of industry sectors and practice areas. This is in continuation to our efforts in bringing out knowledge-centric virtual platforms. Lex Witness Virtual is presenting this webinar to you in association with Varis Law. Varis Law advises several listed companies on regulatory aspects from security laws to competition law. Varis Law has been transaction counsel in the past few years to many SEBI-regulated buybacks, a large IPO, and several sensitive advisory matters. Before we begin the webinar, I would like to familiarize all attendees with a few house rules. All attendees may please place the questions in the Q&A box at any time during the session, which our session moderator, along with the esteemed panelists, will address towards the end of the session. Without any further delay, I now take the privilege to introduce our speakers of the day. Srishti Ojha will be moderating the panel. She is the managing partner for Varis Law. She has a vast experience in security laws and listed space and has advised on various open offers, listed buyouts, buybacks, delistings, listings, and pipe transactions. Srishti graduated from National Law School, Bangalore in 2002 and specializes in regulatory space and increasingly in pre-dispute situations. Our next panelist is Anubhav Kapoor. He is the Group Vice President Legal and Group Company Secretary for Cummins India. Anubhav is responsible for legal, IP, regulatory compliance, corporate governance practices, and policies for all entities and joint ventures of Cummins in India. Our next panelist is Ambar Gupta. He is the Head Legal and Company Secretary for Aditya Birla Sun Life Insurance. Ambar has over 20 years of work experience in the field of legal, compliance, and secretarial functions. In his present role, Ambar is responsible for implementing, strengthening, and monitoring of legal, compliance, and secretarial framework for the brokering and wealth management business. Our next panelist is Amit Deshpande. He is the Company Secretary and Corporate General Counsel for Sterlite Technologies, which is a Vedanta Group company. Amit is a senior legal professional having extensive work experience of over 15 years in various areas, including corporate law, M&A, corporate restructuring, financial closure, legal due diligence, statutory compliance, international commercial contracts, arbitration, land acquisitions, and many more. Last but not the least, our panelist is Zamir Hathani. He is presently working as a General Counsel and Senior Vice President at UFO Movies. Zamir has PhD from Harvard Business School, Executive MBA from NMIMS, Master's degree in Law, Private Equity from London Business School, US IP Laws from Stanford University, Intellectual Property Rights Certification from WIPO United Nations, and M&A from Harvard Business School. Welcome all. Hope we have a great session. I would now request our session moderator, Ms. Srishti Ojha, to take the discussion ahead.
Thank you, Bhupinder, and thank you again to all the panelists. We look forward to an extremely fruitful discussion. This topic is, because it is sensitive, not very frequently discussed and not very frequently found in public domain. And so it remains, while supposedly dry, also very live, because it does involve human situations and reputational risks. And nothing can be more serious, like we were earlier discussing, than a genuine complaint against any aspect of a listed company. So here's what I will do. I'm Srishti, by the way, just to repeat. I am founder of Varis Law, and we work with a bunch of listed companies inter alia. I will lay out the lay of the land. It's fairly simple. And then we can move over to the panelists for their sense of disconnects with realities, with their sense of how things happen and how shouldn't happen, etc. So here goes. Let's talk of the three buckets as we see it, or as I see it as a lawyer. One, as a in an advisory context, not in a practical context, with all due humility. One is the whistleblower mechanism. This is a creature of the erstwhile listing agreement, the LODR. The second is the vigil mechanism, which is one of those happy areas which Section 177 Companies Act talk about, as well as the LODR. And the third is the investor grievance committee, which is often relegated to a specialized cell just because it's very easy to go wrong. It's highly regulated in terms of timing, dates, the kind of reports you should submit, etc. Next, we can very quickly cover, I tend to ramble and I'm conscious of that. We can very quickly cover the who. So it's the who and the why and the how. Let's look at the who. Who meaning, who are the beneficiaries of these processes, various processes. We've already covered where it's flowing from. So for whistleblowers, it is, interestingly, it is stakeholders. And it says including employees. So their companies have are almost nudged. It cannot be an oversight. Stakeholders is a very well thought out term to expand the number of players who can avail that mechanism. Because when it comes to vigil mechanism, the law says that the who is restricted to employees and directors. And for investor grievance, it's investors, which is very well known to mean even one shareholder qualifies as an investor, that there is no threshold out there like there is in operation mismanagement, etc. So I own one share, which I may have even inherited, and we've come across those claims. We used to come across them back in my personal IPO days as well, and one has to take that seriously. So that is the who of it. Just to recap, for whistleblowers, it's stakeholders, including employees. For vigil mechanism, the 177, it's employees and directors. And for investor grievance, it's investors. Now the why. Why meaning what are the grounds? So for whistleblowers, it's illegal and unethical practices, which is, to me, as a transactional advisory lawyer, it's interesting, because why would you say unethical if you have already said illegal? The law does not tend to repeat. So this seems to indicate that even a potential smell test can be a ground. In other words, there are some things which are unethical but are legal. Otherwise, why would the law say illegal and unethical? You don't presume redundancy in the legislation when interpreting it. The vigil mechanism says genuine concerns. All that means is that anything frivolous, and it literally says frivolous, can be discarded, which is assumptive. And as far as investor grievance, SEBI, which we personally love to deal with SEBI laws, and we as lawyers like it because they're highly prescriptive. And they have given a negative list of who cannot complain, or the situations where you cannot complain. One is you pretty much cannot be anonymous because you literally need a PAN card for scores. And it uses that word, cannot be anonymous. It cannot be something seeking an explanation. It has to have supporting documents. It cannot be a private dispute between me and the company. It cannot be sub judice, and so on. And this, of course, has to be filed. There's an entire system which the panelists will cover. It's easily found in the public domain. So I don't think we should take up time on that, on the timelines. Short point is that certain sets of disputes are now looked at by the stock exchanges. The first port of call is the listed company and the bankers, then the stock exchanges for certain prescribed disputes. For the rest, it's the listed company and SEBI. SEBI and the stock exchanges, the legal standard is just be objective. There's a Bharatmati case in 2020. There's nothing more. They are not obliged to investigate everything. But there is an obligation on the listed companies to file timely action taken reports with proof of reasonable action taken and proof of having communicated that to the investor. The investor has about 15 days to say they're satisfied or not and come back with reasons why, etc. It's highly regulated. So this is a lay of the land. I hope everyone's awake, because this is possibly the driest part of the piece, because now we have some very senior general counsels on board, and it's a privilege because this is a topic which it's almost too sensitive, and you have people who are from the right domain with the right level of experience who will, in an appropriate sort of manner, delve into what are typically the gaps, what are typically the adversities we face in the in-house context. We won't get very jurisprudential, we won't get very normative, and so on. So now I'll maybe open the house to questions. Everyone must be tired of my voice, and we move on to Amit sir. And if Amit can maybe throw light on the vigil mechanism. The Companies Act pretty much says it has to have effective measures. It says that you have to protect the directors and the employees from retaliation. And it doesn't talk about a couple of areas which maybe you may want to touch upon.
Thank you, Shushma. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. And as rightly explained by Shushti, I think that is very clear that Section 177 of the Companies Act speaks about visual mechanism, which essentially deals with directors and employees to report genuine concerns. Now, it is like a similar thing about such like a whistleblower thing, but it is defined under the Companies Act, which is called as visual mechanism. So I think the words used are interchangeably same. So that is the first part. Then it also says that it should provide adequate safeguard against victimization of persons who use such mechanism and make provisions for direct access to the chairman of the audit committee in case of appropriate and exceptional cases. So here it is an important aspect that the chairman of the audit committee, which is like a board member position, needs to have a direct access of each and every visual mechanism, like any complaint or any concerns which are reported under visual mechanism. So what are the mechanism or what is the process followed by the company in such regard is important, and how we are reporting it to the audit committee chairman on what is the frequency of that report, whether all such genuine concerns are like what is the evaluation mechanism followed by the management. So all these are the practical aspects which a company has to prepare a kind of a SOP and report it to the audit committee on a quarterly basis. And additionally, Section 177 also prescribes that the details of these visual mechanisms received by the company during the year needs to be disclosed on the website and in the company's board report. So this is essentially a summary of what is a visual mechanism under Section 177. Just to add, I think I will just also cover the SEBI LODR requirement of like it talks about the stakeholder, which is a wider definition than what it is mentioned in the Companies Act. It mentions about the rights of its stakeholders and encourage cooperation between the listed entity and the stakeholders. It is more important that here they also mention that that the stakeholders will be given an opportunity to obtain effective redressal for the violations of their rights. So the word used is stakeholder, and there are prescribed ways in which it mentions that stakeholders shall have access to the relevant and sufficient reliable information. Here it means like the shareholders or the other stakeholders. It also includes employees and their representative bodies. Like practically there will be there will be employee associations or say a worker union. So all those also will be part of this stakeholder because it's a wider definition. So it's important that under the listing regulation, even a complaint by a representative body of an employee can also come under that radar of stakeholder. So this is a brief about the LODR as well as the visual mechanism under Section 177.
Thanks, Amit. That was a great overview. Is there something you may like to add on fuzzy topics such as conflict of interest and what you may, it's the law is silent on it, but intuitively we know that could be an issue.
Yeah, sure. So this is a very important element because what is, I can just define it like what can be called as an unethical thing. It is like, for example, if an employee is not comfortable to disclose any of his actions in his official capacity to the company or to his superiors, I think that action is likely to be called as unethical or a kind of unethical action as such. So in that context, it is important that the organization should define what are the conflict of interest areas and how they are communicated to the employees by like mentioning it in the code of conduct of the company, and also on a frequent basis communicating what are the areas, like there should be a questionnaire which should be formed by the company and should be communicated to the employees. A quiz kind of thing can be started by the company where they can like take a test from the employees and suggest that whether this is the situation and whether the concerned employee is in conflict of interest of that. So that conflict of interest is a wide area where it's important that the employees should understand where to inform their manager or to HR on whether it is a conflict and whether it will have any consequences under the code of conduct. So that needs a deeper understanding from employees' point of view. So this is a very important, like for example, there can be situations where employees have their relatives appointed with the vendor or outsourcing partner. So then there are employees directly using the company's admin like vehicle personal use. So that way, again, one example that is available. So all those aspects, they should be aware about what they are supposed to do and what they are not supposed to do under the conflict of interest situation.
Exactly. So that inadvertently one does not end up breaching it.
Yeah.
That's right. Thank you for that. Very insightful.
Rishi, can I add a couple of things to what Amit said?
Yes.
So Amit touched upon the framework in context of the loader guidelines and the Companies Act, right? And you topped it up with the conflict of interest discussion. Now, conflict of interest, I think it takes it to a deeper overall governance within the corporates, which falls under the framework what we call as the GRC, the governance, risk and compliance, you know. And there are 3 or 4 things that we do as corporates to ensure transparency, fairness, and if both of them fail, then what is the redressal mechanism that we are talking about? And it can include sometimes grievance management as well, which is basically the ethics and then subsequently sometimes the whistleblowing process. Actually, this is you brought in the right context, because many times it is this series of things that fall in place which lead to the entire framework of grievance management. So, and therefore, what is also important is in terms of the tone from the top, the policies that the companies have laid out for the employees and how they are creating the training and awareness within the company. And the third is in terms of how we administer the vigil mechanisms or the whistleblowing mechanisms and the whole administration, which gives the confidence to the stakeholders that they can rely on such systems, right? And that is probably, I think, the essence of any grievance management system as far as within the corporate is concerned. Some of it is legislative, as you rightly pointed out, but large part of that is also depending on the administration part of it. I just wanted to highlight that within the limited context what Amit said.
Yes, thank you. And that also points to best practices, because that is where you can step up what the law is to what the law sort of should be and take it up. Thank you for that. We can maybe come back to that and look at how it is a part of a risk management as well and best practices as well. Maybe moving on to Amber, and would Amber have views on or special experiences to share on policy formulation and on investigations? I would personally think that the most lively part of this entire debate, taking aside the drier aspects of the black letter law, is investigations. And in POSH, for example, people have the power of civil courts, and here it's a little different. So how have you, all of you would have seen it played out. I have not, because I'm not in a company. And everyone's views here will be welcome, maybe led by Amber.
Thank you. I'm audible? I'm audible?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. A very warm welcome to everyone and good evening to everyone. Amit rightly summarized some of the key provisions. Now, of course, you need to have a written documented policy, whether you call it a whistleblower policy or a policy on vigil mechanism. It's mandatory to have it approved by the audit committee and the board, and also required to disclose on the website of the company. Now, depending on the sector that you are, what kind of regulatory body is governing you, whether listed, non-listed, regulated, unregulated, the policy can have different aspects that you need to cover it. But at the bare minimum, the policy will have what is the objective, to whom this policy applies, what are the coverage of this policy, whether it applies to ex-employees also, if he has under what circumstances. Some of the examples of which can be reported under the policy, starting from unethical practices to conflict of interest to POSH also, depending on what kind of sector you are into. And then, of course, whom to report, how to report, what will be the investigation procedure, what will be the escalation mechanism, what are the provisions in the policy in terms of protection and protection of the whistleblower against victimization, and what are the consequences or what are the safeguards that person can take into, and then to whom this report will be submitted. And Of course, after the report is submitted, what are the actions which typically can be taken, and then reporting to the audit committee and to the board, and disclosure in the annual reports and stock exchange, so forth, for listed companies say under Regulation 30, which I will not go into detail because another area of discussion. So these are the key areas that you can cover into the policy. Who can be the SPOC, who are the investigators. Of course, a large part of it revolves around the audit committee, the chairman of the audit committee, the legal department, the HR department, vigilant officers, and all those. And you may see in different types of policies for a manufacturing company to a financial services company, in case of a service company, depend on the sector. And if you're regulated, for example, in our case, we're regulated by insurance. So of course, IID would have certain expectations. Similarly, RBI would have certain expectations of banking company, and so on and so forth. But the very important aspect in terms of what you do when a whistleblower complaint is reported, uh, how the steps are to follow, because making a substantive provision and the policy is the most easiest part, and the investigation and reporting becomes the most critical and the most important aspect. And that's I would say the heart of the entire process. And anything not done properly in the investigation part can lead you to all the troubles, even if you may have the best of the policy and reporting mechanism. Of course, different companies may adopt a different process and mechanism for reporting and investigation. But typically, the process will start with once the matter is being reported. Of course, there would be certain dedicated email IDs, certain hotlines where people can call and report, or they can also write letters and submit it to the grievance officer, vigilance officer, XYZ. Of course, if you see the public sector, the policies which are adopted by public sector, they are totally different. And while I think Zamir will touch base more, the Whistleblower Protection Act, which has come in terms of how you're going to do the in case of public servant, it works in a different manner compared to a private company. So I'll largely touch upon the private company process. Now the investigation, the basic process starts with the once the complaint is given, then you have to have an inquiry officer or an vigilant officer or some kind of a fraud investigation officer who will do a basic deep dive in the investigation. It can be done by an HR department, it can be done by a legal department, and you can have a dedicated department depending on the size and the industry you are into. That vigilant officer has to do a first basic inquiry whether this complaint is genuine or not. It is whether it is anonymous or not, whether it has got proper information or not. And if these things are submitted, what kind of because for example, a lot of times people try to report certain complaints which may not be specifically a whistleblower or a vigil mechanism. For example, issue between two managers, issue between senior and juniors. All those things may not qualify under vigil mechanism or a whistleblower mechanism. It has to be under specific criteria in terms of financial embezzlement, fraud, unethical practices, conflict of interest, and so on and so forth. So at the very basic level, you have to do the sorting, and then your investigation starts. Now it's very important that at there, whether you can have a subcommittee, which could be an ethics committee, you can have a vigilance committee, or you can have a value standards committee, which may have a representation within the organization by an independent person. Some companies have an independent person heading it. Some audit committee chairman heads it. Certain, in some companies, the HR head heads that subcommittee, which will have a representation from 3-4 people. And kind of there you can lay down a complete standard operating procedure as to how much time the investigation will happen, who will do the investigation, within how many days the report has to come, and then you can do the investigation. If the investigation is of something which is very routine nature, which do not involve any major issues, in-house can be done. But if it's a whistleblower complaint which has come, which is of a grave concern against senior management of the company, like we have seen in last year in one of the companies, which is one of the top IT software company of India, and there are whistleblower which is made against the finance head and the CFO and CEOs of the company. Of course, in that case, you would know an independent third party was involved for doing the investigation and submitted report to the audit committee chairman. So then you have to do an investigation, and of course, during in-house investigation, you have to be very careful. One, because the identity of the whistleblower should not be leaked. Many times in the zeal of investigation, these things are not taken care. So you have to maintain complete secrecy of that particular person, the complaint which has come, plus against whom the complaint has come. You have to also ensure that there is no victimization both of the person who has made the whistleblower and the person against whom the complaint has come. Certain aspects of labor laws and principles of natural justice and should be followed at the time of investigation in terms of giving proper hearing, inquiry, documenting the statements of the witnesses, getting it signed, recordings, etc., with the consent, and so on and so forth. So these things are very critical, very important to keep in mind. The format of the investigation reports becomes very critical. What you are writing, the time, date, when it was happened, what was happened, who were the witnesses who had witnessed these kinds of statements which were given. Wherever possible, try to take a written statement from the witnesses or from the person who has been investigated or whistleblower, so that there is no allegation of later on that these are fabricated. Uh, Wherever possible, take an undertaking that these were given and read and understood, and so on and so forth. Recording, if you're doing in a proper recording, then ensure that consent is there and those recordings are well saved, and then you can submit a report to the ethics committee or to the vigilance committee or in-house committee, depending on the policy level. Whatever the action is recommended, which can start from depends on the nature of offense which is being reported, which can start from demotion, talking of your performance bonus, suspension, even termination. uh, that the committee can take a call, or it can directly go to the chairman of audit committee. Well, LODR casts a lot of responsibility on the chairman of audit committee, but practically you won't expect a chairman of audit committee to read all the complaints and give his views. So normally it's a subcommittee or the whistleblower committee or the value standards committee, ethics committee, etc. takes that view, and then they can submit a summary report to the chairman of the audit committee, and then at a periodic interval, say quarterly, you must submit a report during what are the complaints have come, what are the actions have been taken, what are the recommendations have been into the audit committee. And in some cases, you can also report to the board, depending on the which regulator. Some regulators also expect the boards to be aware on a quarterly basis. Now, very interesting part is that how do you preserve the investigation report? Because tomorrow, if that particular person against whom the complaint has been taken is not satisfied the investigation, he can file an appeal. Now, appeal provisions can be there in the policy itself, which can be in-house. For example, it can go to the next level to the committee or beyond to the board or to an executive committee, or they can go a legal recourse to a civil court challenging the action which has been taken, which is a termination in case of or any service conditions which are there. So very, very careful analysis needs to be done in terms of what kind of action which are you be taken. Is this a practice which has happened, or it is a one of a incident which has happened, and should be well aware of the repercussions of that will happen, and make your legal team fully aware. Take a view of your legal department or in-house or external, so that you are full protected in case any action has been taken by the employees and if they go in civil court. So the investigation report needs to be well preserved, well signed, dated, so that because this will become very crucial piece of evidence. Of course, the show cause notice, after the investigation happens, then you issue a show cause notice, and then reply is given, and then only you take an action. So in a lot of time we have seen a lot of time based on investigation reports, only the action is taken, but that should not happen. To the extent possible, the person who is doing the investigation and the person who is executing there should be two different persons. The investigation should give the report to the concerned person, and then the HR department or any other department which is depending on the company which you are working or the industry, they should issue the respective show cause notice, give an opportunity to hear, and then take a recommended action. And be well aware that those documents are well preserved in case the matter is contested in the civil court. A very important aspect, you have to be also aware about the regulation 30, the SEBI LODR, which requires that important information to be disclosed to the company. Now, this is a bit of a gray area because whistleblower complaints are not specifically mentioned, to my knowledge, in the regulation 30. But it is something which is critical and may impact the share price of the company because of the whistleblower mechanism. Then probably the company secretary of the company has to take a proper, suitable judgment and consult the stock exchange if required, whether these are to be reported, because we have seen in the past, especially in last 2-3 years, where such large whistleblower complaints had come, they have not got reported, and SEBI has issued so-called notices to some of these companies asking why they was not disclosed. Of course, the investigation of these complaints in some cases has come as false, and in some cases it has come true. In some cases it was not established, so that that you can play around, but that is the most critical part also in terms of how do you report that in Section 30, Regulation 30, when it comes to stock exchanges, depending on the the whistleblower complaint or vigil mechanism which has come. And third thing is that as a good practice, if you ask me, we should, as a good practice, company should constitute an ethics committee separately from an audit committee. Because some of the regulations, though the audit committee has, if you see the terms of reference of audit committee, there are so many things that are interested. And this is a very highly specialized. So as a good practice, I can recommend that large companies, especially, they can create a separate ethics committee, which can periodically review these complaints and then can submit the report to the chairman of audit committee for his evaluation. And it will kind of give you also an independent view of operating aspects in whether the vigil mechanism is working well or fine or not. Because one of the disclosures and the statement that you have to make in your annual report, whether the vigil mechanism has been working fine or not. So that statement has to be given by the board of directors and has to be certified. So that will be very critical. So you have to ensure that you don't only have the policy, you have a proper process of reporting, investigation, and disclosures to the stock exchanges and in your annual report. Yeah.
Thanks, Amber. That was very useful, especially the suggestion of splitting up the investigation and the entity that is sort of issuing the show cause notice. And in a way, the investigation should almost have a standard of a tribunal, or with due process, or audio alterum partum, etc., and use best practices. It almost is like a quasi tribunal. And also, I think LODR 30 does have a laundry list of things that are deemed to be material whistleblowing. Isn't one of them, but definitely it should be something company should consider if it is UPSI or not, and then file it timely. Otherwise, it's too late. Thank you again. And now we can maybe move on to our next panelist. And at any time, the other panelists can always contribute. And our next panelist is Zamir. Zamir has a vast and rich experience across at least a couple of large listed organizations. And may I invite Zamir to speak in particular of the whistleblower mechanism.
Yeah, thanks, Srushti, and hi to everyone. Srushti said that the subject is not dry, it's live. I can only say that it becomes sometimes not only live, it becomes volcanic when you remember the infamous frauds which happened, like Enron, WorldCom, Satyam, Punjab National Bank, ICICI Bank, Kingfisher, Rotomac Pens, Sterling Biotech, IPL, Lalit Modi, which happened. And many more prominent ones, which have always highlighted the importance of the corporate governance. Coming to the whistleblower part of it, I think according to the Companies Act 2013, whistleblowing is an action aimed at drawing the attention of the stakeholders to instances of unethical practices in an organization. Now, under the Central Act concerning allegations against public servant, it's a mechanism to receive complaints regarding the alleged corruption or willful misuse of the power or discretion. A whistleblower can be anyone who chooses to expose wrong practices and has evidence to support the allegations. They can either be from within or outside the organization. They can be current or former employees. They can be shareholders. They can be auditors, lawyers, anyone from the one important thing is to highlight is like whistleblowers are protected under the Whistleblowers Protection Act. The law actually provides for protection of their identity and also has strict norms to prevent their victimization. For instance, an organization cannot initiate proceeding against a whistleblower pending a probe into the allegations. The same sections have been adopted in the Companies Act, which applies to listed companies and are a part of the Securities and Exchange Board of India's governance norms. All listed and public sector firms need to have a whistleblower policy that actually outlines the procedures and recourses available to complainants. Of course, if a complaint is proven to be frivolous, the complaint can face a jail term up to 2 years. So that was the measure of keeping a checks and balance. But most importantly, before the regulation, the most highlighted case what we saw was in October 2013, when Infosys agreed to an $8 million settlement offer by a US federal court after a former IT manager with the firm filed a whistleblower lawsuit against them. The manager had made an allegation that he was sidelined and victimized by the firm's top bosses after he refused an internal settlement offer. That episode basically highlighted what was the need for having this particular law also powerfully existing in India. It has gaps within that, but the idea is to introduce it, nurture it, and grow it is where India is heading towards. SEBI also considered awarding for such information and successful actions against insider traders. It has also created a cooperate and confidentiality mechanism. This means that if someone is guilty of violating security laws, is willing to assist in the larger probe, the person will be given exemption from penal action and the identity will also be kept confidential. Again, what we saw in October 2009 was a whistleblower who accused Infosys of unethical practices to boost numbers. This is all public news. There was an anonymous group which called itself as an ethical employees, which had complained to the board of Infosys and the US Security and Exchange Commission, alleging that the company is taking unethical steps to boost short-term revenue and profit, and stating that the complainants have emails and voice recordings to substantiate the claims. Ultimately, the company found it that these allegations were in the mere nature of an allegation. When I talk about whistleblower, when I talk about some instances which have happened and the background of it, I want to throw open here also the numbers which are there. So this law is been effectively used. Whistleblowers are protected, whistleblowers are coming forward. Some of the past numbers, if you see for Wipro, it was about 1,526. SBI received 908. Tata Steel was about 372. Tech Mahindra was 359. TCS was 138. HDFC Bank was about 46. And these total numbers come to about 3,500 in terms. Going to the statistics now. So 3,500 plus whistleblower complaints were received. This was more than what was received in the past. With about 1,500 cases, Wipro at that time was in the highest in the league, which also means on both sides of it that they had mechanisms for receiving such complaints. And that's the adaptive challenge and sequence we need to learn from these companies. 16 Nifty companies have seen about 37% year-on-year jump in the whistleblower complaint. Indian companies are typically, this is a perception that Indian companies are typically reactive and not proactive or affirmative. While this is not to discourage whistleblowing, vigil mechanism has been also an active agenda which has been followed. 40% of the Nifty 50 companies had made no mention of the whistleblower cases received in the past year. Complaints received by companies are generally regarding financial impropriety for personal gain or for meeting organizational targets or personal impropriety. Cases of financial impropriety include accounting fraud, embezzlement, procurement fraud, conflict of interest, bribery and corruption, fraudulent claims, theft of confidential data or physical asset, insider trading, tax evasion, violation of tax laws, and false employee credential. In fact, there were tip-off from India also to United States SEC, which was about 14 whistleblower tip-offs were also given from India to United States SEC. While these numbers are available with us, we are also addressing the concern of the anonymity of the complaints. Now, when you have investigation of such complaints, which is a sensitive matter, as allegations are relating to the internal operations of the company, it has to be adequately examined and relevant persons ought to be interviewed to arrive at conclusion. Any premature disclosure of complaints may be harmful to the interest of the company and its stakeholders. What is also most stressed is that where the investigation yields no evidence supporting the allegation, the committee is not required to take any further action or make any other disclosure. That has to be a satisfying criteria. Otherwise, there is a provision of appeal which is available, and the person can also go to the regulatory authorities further then. if the investigations reveal there are irregularities in the operation of the company, depending upon the nature of the irregularity and its impact on the business operations and financial conditions of the company, the audit committee should notify the board of directors, and the board should make a suitable disclosure to the exchanges. In terms of the retaliation, what we have seen is that the companies need to have an effective policy that could bridge the gap between the fear of retaliation by powerful people in the case of unsavory disclosures, etc. Also, employees are often at the risk of losing the job. The Act provides a mechanism to investigate alleged corruption and misuse of power by public servants, and also protects anyone who has alleged any wrongdoing in the government. So this is the power of the law we are dealing with. And in the case of public sector undertaking, we have also seen that the Act has allowed disclosures that are prohibited under the Official Secrets Act that can also be made to that extent towards a public servant. In fact, the Supreme Court of India has been also very clear on it, that protection by way of a sanction, which is required under Section 197 of the CRPC, is not applicable to the officers of government companies or public undertaking, even when such public undertakings are state within the meaning of Article 12 of the Constitution on account of deep and pervasive control of the government. With this portion of the whistleblower, where you have private companies, where you have numbers, where you have checks and balances, what are the ingredients of the law, and what Supreme Court also says when a state or a public company is involved. It's also a legal requirement for the top companies to have a business responsibility report as part of their board report under Regulation 34 of the listing regulation. The BBR format requires disclosure on stakeholder complaints. So this is what is I want to put it on the plate in terms of the whistleblower and things which are available to it under it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amir. Very, very enlightening, especially the bit about the last bit about the board report requiring disclosures. And that also brings us to a quick reminder that it is not only listed companies, which this is a requirement from Companies Act, and besides the SEBI disclosure norms. And it's not just listed companies which have to follow the vigil mechanism in particular, it's also companies that take loans above a certain limit and who accept public deposits. Also, thank you for your questions, and thank you, Amber, in particular. I can see you've answered a couple of them, trying to look at the window on the side as well. Moving on, Amit, would you have something to
I would just add to what Amber had said, that it is very important that we have a formal structure of ethics committee as a subcommittee of the company, which is available, so that there is a structure in which all these whistleblower complaints or ethics related complaints are addressed. And then it goes to the report of this committee will go to the audit committee on a quarterly basis. So it is important that one is there is a subcommittee or a management committee, which is called as an ethics committee, which may also have independent external members also to have the credibility for that. And in addition to that, there has to be a clear communication within the organization, which is very important, because ultimately employees or the vendors or our partners may be of the view that I was never aware about any such kind of issues. So that's why it is important that we communicate properly under the code of conduct or through our internal like newsletters, like ethics newsletters, or on a quarterly basis with various employees, that it is important to for all of us to understand what are the whistleblower mechanism, what are the channels of communications, where it is to be like what is the email ID, what is the number which has to be where you can register your complaint, and also to give security that nothing will happen to them and their name will be anonymous and all that. So that is also very important aspect.
Yes, thank you. Because the whole point of this is to allow the employees or whoever is complaining to feel free and safe, and sensitize them to how it should not be that there's a genuine complaint which gets rejected on ground of a technical defect, for instance. Stepping back, I think there was a question on ethics, and I think this has been effectively answered. I think that's common to Amber, Amit, and Zamir, that they've all stressed on how it's practical. It will be practical to have an ethics committee also, because it will not then be challenged on grounds of conflict of interest, and also I would guess potentially because it may be otherwise distracting to the management, and for various reasons. I hope that answers one of the audience questions.
Just to quickly just to add is that 2 points Samir which mentioned, and just to as a corollary of that, if you see there's already a Whistleblower Protection Act, which got,
For the government,
yeah, but that is applying, government organization, public servants.
Yes.
And but if you look at the private employees, unfortunately, there is no such act which is there. And in fact, there was an amendment which was also had come in that particular, bill was introduced, but which could not get passed. But for private companies, private employees, there is no such act which has still come up. SEBI, you have a couple of years back has announced, incentive schemes where people can come and report and all this. So there's no legal such a protection which is there, and so your policy will protect more of that, and your principles of natural justice will protect in terms of people who have come forward and made any disclosures of wrongful practices. So that you have to be very mindful of that particular aspect as well. I just wanted to add that particular point. On the ethics committee, the idea which I have given is because large organizations, sometimes an audit committee role, this is my personal view, and nothing that I have seen audit committees, they are already overburdened with many other aspects of financials, auditors, and all those things. And if you have a separate ethics committee which specifically looks at some of these aspects, it gives a more of independence. Second thing, it also gives more value-added practices, and they can go in deeper into these aspects and look at not only the reporting and investigation, but they can also do a root cause analysis, whether it's an issue of a process, it is an issue of an industry, it is an issue as a practice which has evolved over a period of time. It could be many things that can happen. So that will give a more objectivity in terms of action taking and recurring a corrective course and action rather than just investigating, taking action and reporting. I think we all many times forgets that particular aspect, that why it has happened, what are the core reason it has got. Is there any root cause analysis needs to be done to fix it at the basic level? Is it a process issue or an ethics issue or is it a practice issue? Many things in an organization over a period of time becomes as a practice. It may be still be legal, but it could be unethical, but it becomes a practice. And so it's very important to have that. It's not mandatory. Some of the, for example, just to pick it up, IIDA corporate governance regulations which applies to insurance company, they specifically ask about that. It is, you can create a voluntary committee, ethics committee, compliance committee, which can look into it. Some of the large organizations, apart from having a chief legal officer, chief internal auditor, chief risk officer, also have a separate person as a chief ethics officer who is looking out to some of these particular areas. So these are some of the international practices which I just mentioned.
Thanks, Amber, again. And I think that was also one of the questions. And the direct answer to that question would be no, there is no legal mandatory ethics committee, but for all the collective experience of everyone here suggests that it should be, if not mandated, then it is very relevant, especially in larger organizations. Amit?
One statement just about like we have independent directors as the audit committee chairman, and now because of this various issues which are there in the industry, they have also become very proactive in understanding whether the company has been receiving any whistleblower complaints or not. So whether your mechanism is effective or not, the best way to look at it is whether on a quarterly basis, are you receiving any whistleblower complaints? And if the management says that we don't have any, we have 0 complaints this quarter, then that itself is a question that whether your mechanism is effective or not effective, whether you are properly communicating it to the employees, is there any threat to the employees for making whistleblower complaint? So all those aspects are very like monitored at the highest level of the organization at the audit committee. So it's very important that the management as well as the persons who are responsible for whistleblower mechanism have taken necessary steps to follow the awareness within the organization.
Thanks. We'll just wrapping up on that before we move to Mr. Kapoor, our next esteemed panelist. And I think we still have time because Amber in particular has replied to most of the questions. Actually, I think we can move to the panelist discussion and come back. Yeah, to Mr. Kapoor, please.
Thank you, Srishti. And this was, I think, the energy that other panelists brought in the discussion leaves no doubt that this is a much lively and kicking subject, right? For practitioners like us who not only face it, but kind of have the biggest dilemmas when we practice this in our day-to-day decision making, right? I personally have been in situations where these decisions are one of the toughest decisions, where it almost feels like you are being a GC in a conflict situation. You are the umpire and you are also the person who has to declare out or not, right? And it leaves many of us who are within the organization in a very, given that we are all custodian of many of these principles of transparency and assurance and ethics and whistleblowing. It is indeed a very tough subject when it comes to real situations, right? And that is where the reality kicks in. So I think there are 3 or 4 views I have on the subject that is being discussed. One is, I think this is a relatively new area as far as the Indian jurisdiction is concerned. There were companies from MNCs who brought these policies and part and parcel of their extended organizations in India, but it is more recent. When I say it is after the Companies Act and after we added the other provisions, this is more of a progressive area, and it is still seeing a number of changes happening to address some of the matters which are core to the exercise of grievance management, whistleblowing, and redressal. So I think Amber touched very briefly on the whole scope of it, right? And while this law is applicable to listed companies in particular, there is really no law right now for, and it is not a mandatory requirement for any private or unlisted companies to adopt a whistleblower policy, which leaves us with a very large area which is uncovered, right? And therefore, why and listed companies comparatively, in terms of, if you see the larger landscape, they are a very small portion of the entire economic framework that we have. And recently we have seen the new Companies Act mandating few of the companies which are listed or in private domain to also publish their accounts, but which is progressive. But largely that area still remains to be is uncovered, is gray, and there are no policies or mandates that are there which require them to kind of also come with a mandatory whistleblowing policy, or in terms of bringing the protection to the whistleblowers as well, and creating an environment of trust in their respective domains. So I think some part of it was addressed when we recently saw the CARO 2020 being rolled out, because one of the provisions under the CARO 2020 was that that the auditor will be required to look into the whistleblower complaints and make reasonable comments in the report that they have been addressed properly, but which is, I think, a very welcome step. It does then touch upon a larger number of companies rather than just companies which are in the listed space. But it is still, we have to see in terms of the coverage and the depth of these legislations across the board. I think that gives us a little more flavor on the larger landscape that is there, that this is still in a very, very, very focused way that we are addressing this area of whistleblowing and protection given to the whistleblowers. I think second, I think the intention, the legislation and the regulators are well intended. I think the way this whole area is progressing and they are putting attention to it is well lauded. And there are many, many areas that we see in terms of the newer legislation that are being brought, addressing this part as well in a very focused way. And this continues to be an important part. I think someone mentioned the Infosys matter, but if you reflect back, the entire ICICI matter, which is still under sub judice and being investigated, was a result of a whistleblower complaint, right? We have large matters like WorldComs, which originated from whistleblowers. So it goes without saying that this is a very, very important part of the entire framework to bring in more transparency within the governance. And there has to be enough protection and enough legislation where we can kind of extend the scope of this provisions to larger economic or corporate landscape, irrespective of whether they are listed or not, because ethics and creating an environment of trust, I think, depends on each and every entity that is operating in the environment. But but however, it should not, on the other hand, create a lot of burden and cost in terms of managing these kind of frameworks as well, which is also one of the realities that we have. Because if we have to create separate ethics offices, we have to create an entire framework and channels for ethics, they do come at a cost, and it requires management attention also to make sure that they are working effectively. You got to train your people for investigations, because many of these, as rightly pointed out, are not easy processes, and they have to be documented in a way that they stand the test of law. So I think given that, I think the legislation is still progressing in the right direction. The second is, in terms of what I reflect, is the process and the procedure, right? And this is one area where it is, I feel it is little fragmented, and there can be little more structure in a uniform way around it. Say, the law does say that you have to put a whistleblower mechanism in place. A company should have a vigil mechanism, but it does not go to the extent of laying down the process and the procedure. Now, here I would just pause and say there are other legislations like the Women or the POSH Act, as we see the Women Harassment Protection Act, which goes to the extent of saying what the committee should be constituted, you should have external person, how the investigation should happen, the time periods of it, and so on and so forth, and clearly lays down the power of the committee or the IC as a quasi-judicial body. But on the other hand, the whistleblowing mechanism, as they are getting more widespread, we still don't see that further step in terms of putting structure and giving it the teeth, the strength, and the empowerment that I think this area requires to make it more powerful. I think there is enough in the legislative landscape which can take us to the next step of enforcing them, but still I think we still need more structure to it. And the reason I tell that is because one of the things that we really see is that even if when whistleblowing complaints come, right, there is tendency in the corporates to kind of constitute different committees as the depending on the complaints. I think since there are no clear-cut guidelines, the entire area is little more flexible in terms of what is the scope of investigation, how the committee will be constituted, who will be participating in the whistleblowing complaint investigations. I think this is still left to individual companies in terms of how they administrate it. I think a little more structure to it and a little more certainty to it will absolutely lend it more teeth. In fact, there have been complaints in the past where companies employees have come back and complained to SEBI that their vigil mechanism is there, but it is not effective. The manner in which it is implemented and the manner of investigation does not address the real core issues that are being complained of, right? And some of this, and some of this, I think with the recent Companies Amendment Act, where they have made mandatory, the SEBI has made mandatory that we have to report the forensic reports to the regulator. If there is, with whatever name called, listed companies are required to make the disclosures to the stock exchanges. and not only at the time of initiation, but also the final forensic audit reports. I think this itself is quite progressive. They've tried to address some of these gray areas which still exist, but this whole mandate itself creates more issues as well, because it doesn't clearly lay down at what point and to what extent we should be reporting. If we have to report the forensic audits at the preliminary state, I think it, without knowing what is the real matter, what are the outcomes, it may create more confusion in the market and the stakeholders, rather than giving the comfort which is the primary motive of it in terms of transparency. Second, I think it also creates a lot of privilege and client privilege issues as well for in-house counsels as well, in terms of to what extent the report has to be disclosed, and whether all the legal advice that is being given by the lawyers and in-house counsel will also form part of the final forensic report that may be done, and may create even issues with respect to that. I think there is, while it is well intended that this is a good progress, a good step in the right direction, but I think little more clarity in terms of what should be actually reported to the stock exchanges and made the public disclosure should be outlined, because certainly it will create more complications if the disclosures are not appropriately made, and it may even lead to it could be even counterproductive in the current regime. So I think, just touching on that point, I think we need little more prescription in terms of the process and the framework in which these legislations are being mandated and implemented. I think just touching on those couple of points, I would give it back to Srishti for further discussion.
Thanks, Anubhav. Just a couple of points which come to mind based on your thoughts is POSH is a great source for sensitization of stakeholders. POSH literally asks for sticking posts in places and having training sessions. It's in the law. If one isn't doing it, one isn't complying. And the other thought was over-reporting of these complaints to the exchanges, saying that we are following 30 of LODR may actually backfire because there's nothing in it. It's at what level one should or one should not. It's a quandary. And finally, not touched on really, but interestingly, in my experience, the investor complaints tend to have a different kind of a vibe, because the investor is very often disconnected from the company. He cannot be anonymous. The SEBI FAQs say cannot be anonymous. But the investor does not have a risk of retaliation, such as the insider or even the vendor has. So we tend to see a difference. At the same time, the investor doesn't have the level of information which an insider has. So they are a little fearless, and that has its own repercussions. And anyhow, on this note, I think we've managed to answer a fair number of audience queries, and perhaps the rest we're happy to answer them. I'm personally happy to answer them offline. And
I just want to add up on the vigil mechanism.
Sure.
So one is whistleblower, one is the vigil mechanism. While we are discussing about, it's applicable to certain listed companies, etc. In fact, last month, what we saw development in the Delhi High Court was that the Delhi High Court has issued a notice to the central government, as well as HP India Sales Private Limited, HP Printers, and others on a petition which was challenging the constitutional power under the Companies Act in terms of vigil mechanism, that is section 177(9) and also 177(10). The petitioner has made a statement saying that there seems to be no reasonable basis that the said protection under the law should be only provided to employees of listed companies, and the same should be denied to employees of other companies, even if such employees are speaking out against unethical practices. That's about vigil mechanism. Under section 177(10), the management is supposed to set up the prescribe the mechanism and the policy, the person submits that, it's an unguided power which has been given to the company management to set up this vigil mechanism without prescribing any threshold principles on the same. And as such, the efficacy of such vigil mechanism is entirely at the mercy of the management and is often rendered redundant. So we had these 2 points which were also highlighted during the discussions. And it's a matter before the Delhi High Court very recently, where Delhi High Court has issued notice to the government and the concerned companies. That's the latest news from my side. Thank you.
Thanks as
thank you,
always.
Sameer. I think those are the things that are important now. If we have to really mature this entire area and create enough jurisprudence and create also environment of or truthfulness within the corporate governance framework,
I agree.
One statement is about this protection of whistleblowers is also important, but what about the frivolous kind of complaints which you receive? Because if a listed company receives a whistleblower complaint which is frivolous, it can erode a net worth of more than 10% in a day, and then it can't be restored in the next day, even if the company itself communicates to the stock exchange that the complaint was false. Whatever damage it had to do was done. So that is something which is very important, that even if protection is important, but there has to be a balance about false complaints also.
I agree.
Absolutely, Amit. In case of Infosys, I think many of us saw, right? The MD or the promoter was saying, I can swear to God that the audit cannot be changed. And there was, after another hour, there was a fax in SEBI's office saying that, from the same group saying that, no, this is not correct. So I think it creates more confusion as well in the mind of the stakeholders.
But I absolutely agree, because that actually erodes the market share. I faced in my past companies where there was some settlement going on, where there were show traders and all who are involved in your settlements, and they try to rake up and down the market by just planting the news or going on this side. So it really affects on that end also. And yeah, that's the cost of running the business as well as running a good PR.
Yeah. And Zamir, these are quite expensive incidents to deal with as well. It requires a number of experts, and it throws the entire board into it easy as well, and the management. Distractions.
Yeah. Okay.
The strategy of dealing with these is maybe for another day. There are various tools available, and we're happy to discuss it maybe in a follow-up event. I think this has been a great one. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank once again Lex Witness for putting this together so brilliantly, and Amber and Zamir and Amit and Anubhav, and also to all the participants for taking their valuable time, and the panelists again for sharing their invaluable insights on this most interesting topic. We hope we can all stay in touch. And once again, if there are some questions unanswered, I'm sure a few of us are happy to answer it offline.
Thank
you so much, Shrishti, and thank you so much, all the esteemed panelists. We've seen a comment in the Q&A box, which is definitely something that we should address here. An anonymous attendee has asked to have your personal views shared on this platform. Lex Witness would really appreciate, and definitely, gives a pat on the panelists back that they've agreed to be on such a sensitive topic and share their professional views. As far as personal views are concerned, I request that attendee to maybe have a rapport with the esteemed panelists and have their personal views off the record. This is a very sensitive topic, and it was indeed a pleasure to listen to all the panelists today. Thank you so much,
Absolutely.
all the panelists, to share.
Every one of you can connect with us on LinkedIn.
Yes,
we are
please.
available there. And thanks to Lex Witness, and thanks everyone.
Most welcome, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all the esteemed panelists.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Shrishti
Thank you,
Oja,
Shrishti.
esteemed panelists, seeking your permission to end the webinar now.
Thank you very much, everyone. Again, bye.